On a cold winter night in 1991, the basement data center of Lambert & Co., one of New York's oldest banks, suddenly caught fire. The flames were contained in just 47 minutes. No casualties, no major property loss. Aside from a few scorched servers, the incident was logged as a minor electrical malfunction, just another routine mishap in a city that burned a little every day. But 3 weeks later, something surfaced. The internal accounting team discovered a strange discrepancy. $50 million had vanished from the interbank transaction system. No withdrawal, no transfer order, no authorized movement of funds. It simply disappeared. The FBI was called in. Dozens of employees were interrogated. Every server combed. 4 independent cybersecurity experts brought in. No breaches. No irregular IP access. No one had entered the building unlawfully. No one, at least on paper, had access to the shadow system where the missing money should have left a trace. Suspicion fell on a young technician. He'd worked overnight near the backup systems the day of the fire, with no evidence to clear or convict him. Pressure mounted. After nearly 3 months of continuous questioning, he took his own life. The investigation stalled, and then it faded. Only a few corrupted logs remained, the missing money, and one name, buried deep in the employee files: Frank Delaney, age 64, a systems technician responsible for backups and data purges. He retired shortly after the fire, citing health reasons. No one noticed. No one followed up. He left the same way he had lived for 27 years, quiet, invisible, unremarkable. 5 years later, an unclaimed body washed up on a northern beach in Scotland. No ID. Forensics tentatively linked it to Frank Delaney. There were no signs of foul play. Case closed. The $50 million officially became a historic accounting anomaly. But in 2002, at a small cemetery in Austria, a security camera caught a frail, white-haired man placing white flowers on the grave of Ronnie Hayes, the young technician accused, and later lost. He came alone, stayed 10 minutes, then vanished. Every year since, someone returns. No one knows who he is, but if Frank Delaney was truly the man behind it all, then he didn't just steal $50 million. He fooled the entire country. Frank Delaney was the kind of man you'd walk past 100 times without ever noticing. He lived alone in a rent-controlled apartment on the east side of Manhattan, just 3 blocks from the bank. He wore the same gray coat every winter, the same tan slacks every summer. Neighbors described him as polite but quiet. Nice enough, they'd say, but always lost in thought. He had worked at Lambert & Co. for 27 years, arriving every morning at 6:30 sharp, leaving just after 3 p.m. Never late, never absent. His title, Senior Backup Systems Technician, meant little to most people. But in reality, Frank held the keys to the deepest parts of the bank's digital memory. He knew every server, every purge protocol, every retention schedule, while others came and went, chasing promotions or falling to downsizing. Frank stayed, steady, invisible, essential. What few people knew was that Frank once served in the U.S. Army, specifically in the Signals Intelligence Corps. In the 1970s, he worked in overseas bases, handling encrypted communications, recovery systems, and black box failures. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't a hacker. He was the guy they called when the spy's hard drive melted. After his wife died in 1986, Frank changed. He stopped going to church, stopped playing chess with the park regulars. He buried himself in routine, work, books, silence. The man who once knew how to recover, lost military code, spent the next 5 years making sure corporate servers shut down correctly. Frank had no children, no pets, no vacations. He rarely smiled, but he was never unkind. The security guards liked him. The secretaries left him donuts. The younger IT staff sometimes asked for help, and Frank always gave it, with that same dry voice and the hint of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. To everyone around him, Frank Delaney was just another quiet man in a world full of noise. But Frank had a gift. He remembered everything. It started with a backup error. In early October of 1991, during a routine midnight sweep, Frank noticed something strange. One of the automated backup reports showed a misaligned checksum. Nothing major, probably a delay in the data sync, but it was unusual. Frank flagged it, documented it in his personal notebook, and ran a manual check. That's when he realized the error had occurred in the system that governed interbank currency holdings specifically, the temporary accounts used to hold liquidity during large-scale fund transfers. That system had a design flaw. Because of the way transactions were batched during international settlements, there was a brief window, less than 2 hours each night, where funds sat in transit, technically unassigned to any specific account. During that time, the money existed in the system, but didn't belong to anyone. It was a ghost amount, invisible to standard oversight. Frank had seen these anomalies before. Most staff dismissed them as timing artifacts, but Frank, he saw something else. He spent the next 2 weeks combing through archived logs, server diagrams, and backup schedules. The deeper he went, the more he realized this wasn't just a blip. It was a doorway, a narrow, temporary, perfectly legal blind spot in the system. If someone knew what they were doing, they could intercept the funds during that twilight zone and move them just enough to redirect and vanish. No one would see it happen. Unless, of course, they were looking. And no one was. Frank didn't rush. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by systems, military ones, corporate ones, human ones, and he knew that the best plans were never born in urgency. They were grown slowly, patiently. So, he watched. For the next 6 weeks, Frank studied the system like a surgeon preparing for a procedure. He traced transaction schedules, logged every anomaly, and mapped out the precise timeline of nightly fund flows. He even created physical diagrams drawn by hand, folded neatly, and hidden in the hollow spine of an old technical manual in his desk drawer. He ran simulations in his head, what-if scenarios. If a transaction was triggered at exactly 2:04 a.m., it would fall into the blind zone. If paired with a duplicate header and spoofed authorization trail, the system would treat it as an internal test transfer, unusual, but not suspicious. The logs would record it as noise unless someone cross-verified with a redundant log that only 3 people in the bank even knew existed. 2 of those people had retired. The third, Frank, he wasn't greedy. $50 million wasn't chosen at random. It was the upper ceiling of what the liquidity accounts could tolerate without triggering the secondary alert system, an amount large enough to disappear within the noise of global wire activity. The only variable Frank couldn't control was time. The bank was preparing for a system-wide overhaul in December, which meant some of the current infrastructure, including the blind spot, would be replaced. He had a deadline, a window of just a few weeks, and he would need a distraction. December 27th, 1991. It was a Friday. Most of the bank's executive staff were on holiday. The trading floor was half empty. Only essential personnel remained. And the building, for once, felt quiet. Frank arrived at 6:31. Carrying his usual thermos of coffee and a folded newspaper, he nodded to the guards, badged in, and disappeared into the lower levels. By noon, he had executed the first phase. Using a hardware override key, he was never supposed to keep one he'd quietly duplicated years ago. He accessed the main backup server housing the interbank transaction logs. In the far corner of the room, concealed behind a loose panel, was an old auxiliary power relay box, long decommissioned and forgotten. Inside that box, Frank placed a modified heating element, no larger than a pack of cigarettes, a relic from his military days, silent, smokeless, and capable of heating a metal coil to 300 degrees Fahrenheit within minutes. He attached it to a redundant cable near the insulation sleeve. Then he closed the panel, locked it, walked away. At exactly 9:47 ppm, as scheduled, the coil reached critical temperature. The cable's insulation caught fire. Smoke filled the sub-basement. Fire alarms triggered. Sprinklers activated. Power to the server racks shorted. A dozen systems went offline. Security evacuated the building. No one was injured. Fire crews reported a localized electrical fire. Damage was limited, but the automated backup system, Frank's domain, was corrupted. The logs from that day were declared unrecoverable. Frank stayed late, as always, helping, troubleshooting, taking notes. By midnight, while engineers scrambled upstairs to contain the chaos, Frank sat calmly in the auxiliary console room. He entered a single line of code, bypassing the corrupted data logs, and inserted the transfer order. $50 million. Routed through 8 shells. Gone in 6 seconds. The Monday after the fire, the accounting department noticed a discrepancy. $50 million. Unaccounted for. At first, they assumed it was a delay, a common occurrence during year-end batch processing. But by Wednesday, it was clear the money was gone. By Friday, the FBI had taken over. The servers were still unstable, logs corrupted, backup data unusable. Investigators hit a wall almost immediately. There were no signs of forced access, no foreign IPs, no tampered cameras, just a window 6 seconds long during which the funds had vanished. In the absence of digital evidence, they turned to people, and there, they found Ronnie Hayes. Ronnie was 28, new to the bank's IT team, young, smart, eager to impress, and unfortunately, scheduled for backup maintenance the same week as the fire. His key card showed late-night access. His console had temporary admin permissions. It didn't matter that those permissions were part of a routine update. It didn't matter that Frank had signed off on it. Ronnie was nervous during questioning. Who wouldn't be? He was grilled for hours. Then again, the next day, and the next. His name showed up in every internal email chain. Senior managers stopped meeting his eyes. Frank never spoke up, never defended him, just nodded politely when asked. Was Hayes present that night? Yes, he said. He ran the diagnostics. I was in another room. That was it. Ronnie was suspended pending further review. He stopped coming to work, stopped returning calls. 3 months later, his body was found in his apartment, an empty bottle of sleeping pills on the floor, a note on his desk that simply read, "I didn't do it." And in the corner of the note, a tiny coffee stain, round, faded. Frank's thermos. Frank submitted his resignation 2 days after Ronnie's death. No one questioned it. His file read, "Health complications." HR processed it quietly after nearly 3 decades of loyal, unremarkable service. He was given a modest pension, a generic farewell card, and a slice of store-bought cake. Then he was gone. He didn't leave a forwarding address. The apartment he'd lived in was found empty weeks later, neat, spotless. Everything folded and boxed. His books were donated. His personal computer had been wiped. No credit card activity, no flights, no vehicle registered in his name. He didn't die. He erased himself. Investigators reopened the case briefly in early 1993 when a retired systems engineer flagged a strange pattern buried in old transaction logs, but it led nowhere, no trace, no digital fingerprint. It was as if the system had done it to itself. Some called it a flaw in the code, others, a ghost in the machine. But a few, quietly, began to suspect. They looked back at Frank's work history, his military background, his access, his silence when Ronnie was questioned, and the way, on the day of the fire, he had stayed late, alone in the auxiliary console room. It was circumstantial, nothing solid. But by then, Frank Delaney was already a ghost. In the spring of 1996, a body washed ashore on the northern coast of Scotland. Male, elderly, no identification, no tattoos, no dental records on file. The autopsy revealed heart failure, likely due to exposure. No signs of foul play. A quiet death, forgotten by the tide. Local authorities buried him in a nameless grave outside a coastal village, but 3 weeks later, Interpol received an anonymous tip. The body might belong to a former American bank employee named Frank Delaney. DNA was extracted. Compared to what little remained on file in the U.S., a hair sample from a decades-old medical form, the match was inconclusive, but close enough to close the case. The FBI accepted the result. Internal reports were updated. The file stamped "Subject deceased." Investigation terminated. Frank Delaney was officially dead. His name never appeared again in any banking system. No offshore accounts tied to him, no confirmed sightings. To the world, the mystery had ended with the body on the beach. But in truth, it had only just begun. 6 years after the case was closed, something strange happened. In 2002, a small cemetery in Austria reported repeated visits to a grave that hadn't received a flower in years. The headstone belonged to Ronnie Hayes, the young technician wrongly suspected in the Lambert fire scandal. It wasn't widely known that he'd even been buried there. His family had relocated. The funeral had been private, and the marker had no photo, no epitaph, just a name and 2 dates. But every March, someone left white lilies. The caretaker grew curious. In 2005, he installed a camera. What he captured was grainy, but telling. A man older, hunched, in a dark wool coat appeared on March 8th. Alone, he stood by the grave for exactly 11 minutes, placed a single flower, and whispered something the camera couldn't catch. Then he turned and walked away. The footage was passed to Interpol. Facial recognition returned nothing, but analysts noted something peculiar: the man's posture, the shape of his jawline, even the way he limped, were all consistent with Frank Delaney's medical records that, according to official files, belonged to a dead man. Interpol didn't pursue it. The case was long closed, the money long gone. But someone, somewhere, knew. And every year since, like clockwork, the white lilies returned. $50 million gone without a trace. A man with no criminal record, no accomplices, no threats, no gun, only knowledge, patience, silence. Frank Delaney didn't storm a vault. He didn't wear a mask. He didn't flee in the night. He simply walked out of the front door quietly, unnoticed, and never looked back. No one ever proved he did it, and no one ever proved he didn't. He left no manifesto, no demands, no claims of justice or revenge, just a ghost story, hidden between corrupted server logs and a forgotten grave. And maybe, just maybe, a single message whispered in silence: I remember you. If you were Frank, would you have done the same? Or would you have stopped? Was he a thief? Or the smartest man the system tried to erase? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and if stories like this speak to you real, haunting, unresolved, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes the best stories are the ones that never truly end.